Hi again, it's Robin with Consider the Wonders, and we are going to continue on our national park travel planning journey. And for this section, we are going to be talking about where you're going to stay. So first things first, you have got to decide whether or not you want to stay inside or outside the park. There are several advantages to both sides. Inside, you're closer to some of the things that you're going to want to do, might be a little bit more expensive. Outside the park, it's going to be a little bit cheaper, and you might have more availability in terms of like where you want to stay, including the variety of places that you want to stay. So definitely first thing to decide, inside or outside. If you're leaning towards staying outside the park, then you've got some options like hotels. Those are probably going to be the most popular options. Some of the national parks are located close to some really nice cities, like Flagstaff is really close to the Grand Canyon. Then you've got Moab, which is really close to Arches and Canyonlands National Parks. So both of those places and many other areas around the country offer some really nice hotels that are near some of the national parks. We're big fans of Marriott. They have come along just in the last maybe 10 years and have built some hotels that are near a lot of national parks, and they're great. So we tend to stay at those whenever we choose to do an outside the park stay in a hotel. Some other options could be a rental property. So you may go like Airbnb or Vrbo or just any other website where you can rent a property. Those have options like cabins and private property, private residence, where you could potentially be staying in a place that's just you. That may be something that's really appealing to you, and then you're able to go into the park. There are also campgrounds that are just outside the parks or within like 30 miles of the parks that can give you a good opportunity to be able to camp. So if you want to stay at one of those, you can. Sometimes the option to stay inside the park in a campground might not be there because it's full already. So looking for a campground that's on the outside could be just as good. If you're looking to stay inside the park, you're actually going to have some of the same options as you would if you were staying outside the parks in terms of like what type of place you can stay at. The best thing that you can do is actually head over to the National Park Service app and put in the park that you're going to go to, and then look at the different like sleeping accommodations that they have, and that'll tell you what your options are. Some of the larger national parks have hotels within the park. So you've got Yellowstone and Glacier National Park that both have really great hotels that you can stay at. Some of them are even historical hotels, and they are like an experience just in themselves. They also can offer a lodge as an option for staying. This could be like a little bit more rustic than a hotel, but not necessarily. Some of the lodges are absolutely like super duper crazy good, nice. So great. Smoky Mountains has a really good one. So just again, check that National Park Service app or the park website to help you figure out which place is right for you. You may be interested in like a cabin or a screened-in shelter. And again, those are usually pretty popular within a lot of the National Park Service locations. And again, you just have got to go on their website or app and check and see if they have that sort of option. And of course, the national parks are going to offer camping. There are over 100 National Park Service locations that have camping. If you're interested to know what those are, we've got a great place on our website that shares all of those things to help you know, like, hey, I really want to go to some of the parks, but I don't know if I can camp there. Well, head over to our site. I'll put a link in the description, and that'll help you decide for that and just give you some more information. Now, if you are planning to go camping in the national parks, there are definitely some questions that you need to ask yourself to be prepared for camping in the parks. The first one is going to be, how many campgrounds are in the park. So if you're going to a really large national park, like say Yellowstone or even the Great Smoky Mountains, they have multiple campgrounds. And so you need to figure out what campground options there are so that you can decide which one you want to go to. Then you want to look at where the campground is and whether or not you can get there. Sometimes these campgrounds were built many, many years ago, and they were not necessarily built for really large rigs like we see today. So if that's you, if you're in a really large rig, make sure that you know, first of all, where the campground is. And that's for everybody. But then also, if you can get to the campground, sometimes there's some pretty sharp turns, or it's heavily tree covered and it just doesn't accommodate something that's really long or really large. And to go along with those larger rigs, you want to make sure that the campground that you want to stay at does not have any length restrictions. If you're heading to Chiricahua National Park in Arizona, it has like a either 23 or 24 foot length restriction. So that means that if you have a rig that is any longer than that, you cannot camp there. And that is such a bummer. That's like the situation for us. We can't camp there, but that's not going to stop us from going there. I'm sure that there's some great things right outside the park that can accommodate our camper. You also want to look at what amenities you're looking for the campground itself. So does this campground have a bathhouse? And is that something that you're wanting? Does the bathhouse have showers? Does it have flush toilets? Does it have those toilets that are just basically a hole in the ground? Does the campground have a dump station? Are you going to be staying there for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and you're going to need to at least dump your gray water out? Is it possible for you to be able to do that in or close to the campground? Also, some of these campgrounds don't have water hookups, and so oftentimes you have to get your water from the dump station if they have it at all. So that helps you to know whether or not you're going to be able to have things like water. Some other things to think about is, are you needing cell service or Wi-Fi while you're there? Do you need to check in with someone, or do you need to be able to send an email for work while you're there? Service at the national parks isn't always the greatest. Sometimes you just have to go up to the visitor center in order to get any sort of Wi-Fi at all. But also, that's part of the appeal of going to the national parks. You can really get away. But if that is an amenity that you're looking for, then you want to figure out whether or not that is a part of the campground that you want to be at. So once you're set on a specific campground that you want to go to, then you've got to think about your campsite. The size of the site is probably going to be the first thing that you want to look for. Obviously, if you can't get into the site, then what's the point of going? So make sure that this campground has campsites that can fit you. Obviously, not all of the campsites are going to be the same size. Sometimes they're 20 feet long, sometimes they're 60 feet long. You just never know. And so the National Park Service website on their campgrounds page is going to give you that information. Also, make sure when you're looking that you are getting a site that is the correct type of site. Sometimes they have just tent only sites. Sometimes they have just RV only sites. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but you just want to make sure that you're getting the right site for the type of camping that you're going to be doing. You also want to think about the amenities that you want at your campsite. So does your campsite have electricity, water, sewer? Those are not typical things for campsites, and certainly not typical things for National Park Service sites, but they are available at some parks. So if you are in a situation where you're like, you know what, I want electricity, I want water, then you don't want to go to a campground and get into a campsite that doesn't have those things. So again, make sure that you know what is happening with your site. Another thing that sometimes these sites will offer is a bear box. Oh, because there's so much wildlife at the national parks, they want to offer you a bear box to put your food in and other things. That way the smell of that food does not attract animals like bears. Because, no one wants to be visited by a bear in the middle of the night and not be prepared for it. So if you're looking for a bear box, it will be able to let you know whether or not there's one as you're looking at all of the other amenities for the site. One really important question that you want to ask is, can I get to the site? So once you are inside the campground, sometimes these campgrounds aren't just a straight line or not just a circle. Like, they are a winding road, and sometimes it's super tricky to be able to get into the site. So you need to make sure that you can do that. I personally love to look on Google Maps. I like to look on the satellite view. I like to see where my site is. Sometimes the sites are angled, sometimes they're straight. And you just want to know whether or not you're going to be able to get into the site once you're there. That length restriction is going to come into play with that, because oftentimes the curves and turns in the campground, you can't even maneuver around those because they're so sharp just to even get to your site. And then once you're at your site, if you're trying to back into a 20-foot site and you're 50 foot long, there's going to be a little bit of an issue there. So definitely knowing whether or not you can get into your site is really important. Another thing to potentially look at is, or not potentially, definitely look at, is if you can make a reservation for your campsite. I'm not one of those people that loves first come, first serve campsites. And I know that those are definitely a thing in a lot of the parks, but so many more parks now every year are coming on board with people being able to make a reservation for a specific site. Sometimes not all of the sites are reservable. So sometimes they'll have half the sites are reservable and half the sites are first come, first serve. So when you're picking out your site, you need to make sure that you know whether or not you can reserve it or not, because if that's important to you to make that reservation, you don't want to get into a situation where you're going to make a reservation and then you realize that it's not possible for that site. Knowing how far in advance you can book a reservation is key. Like, definitely make sure that you know that. There are times when you're going to book Rocky Mountain National Park and you can book it 6 months in advance. You get online to book your reservation, and let's say you can book it at 9 a.m. Well, you forget, and then you're like, oh, I'll just book it this afternoon. Once you actually remember, you get on there to book your site. Oh, somebody's already reserved it. And then there may be a situation where there are no other sites that you can even book. So knowing when you can make a reservation and actually making the reservation are going to be very big factors. The more popular the parks get and the more renovations these national parks do to their campgrounds, the more people are coming to them because they want to experience the parks, number one, but then also they are making the accommodations even better for camping specifically. And so more and more people are coming. So there's, a little competition in order just to get a site. So if you're wanting to stay inside the parks, know when you can make a reservation. When you're making your reservations, definitely check to see what their cancellation policy is going to be. If it's like a week out and something comes up and you have to cancel, you definitely want to know whether or not you're going to get your money back, some of your money back, none of your money back. So figure out what their cancellation policy is while you're doing that. And also while you're there, check out how many days you can camp consecutively at the park. So sometimes they'll let you stay there for 7 days, they'll let you stay there for 14 days, and then you got to move on. So make sure that the number of days that you want to be there fits in with your travel plan that you're making right now. Camping inside the national parks is one of my family's favorite things to do. We absolutely love it. I definitely think there are more positives than negatives for staying inside the national parks, but it can be challenging to actually get in there and get a reservation, get a good site that you want, that you can fit in. So there are times that we will actually choose to stay in a hotel outside the parks. Some of that factor depends on how far away the park is for us. So sometimes flying there just makes more sense. Like we talked about how you're going to get to the park in a previous section, that just works for us. But regardless of where you're going to stay when you get there, just make sure that you're doing this research so that you can know where you're going to be, have that reservation, and then once you get there, you can get into your space or into your room, and then you can enjoy the park. Okay, we are going to head over into our next section, so I will see you when we get there.